Hello, folks and friends. Today I'm going to be talking about suggestions or tips that can help improve your communication in your marriage and with just people in general. This is definitely coming from a place where, for us in our marriage, communication is not something that has come easy to us. It has been, and I wouldn't say that we've completely arrived either. But it is something that we have had to fight for. We have definitely come from a lot of failures in terms of communication, a lot of difficulties and struggles. But with that, with trying to push through and to improve, we have come up and have found that there are just a variety of ways to help with our communication and improve on it. And so communication is obviously a very important part of marriage, important part of life in general. And it is a skill. It is something that I think in your marriage is something that you have to work really hard to improve on and to work at. And unless you and your spouse are professional mimes, you have to communicate. And so you need to learn how to communicate well. For my husband and I, yeah, a lot of, I guess, the things that we do have been born out of a place of just having, like, just going, we just go at it in terms of fighting a lot. We argue a lot. We're both pretty zealous, passionate people in our own ways. And that lends itself to, yeah, having a lot of communication struggles, a lot of communication hurdles that we need to work through. But we're both in this, we're not giving up. And with all of that comes a lot of things that we've learned and a lot of things that we have to just be really attentional about. When we first started dating, and I think now as time has gone on, naturally marriage sort of refines the two people, kind of one unifies them, but also makes them a little bit more akin and likened to one another. And so I think as time has gone on, my husband and I are more alike than when we first started dating. However, when we were dating, I remember thinking, and when we're early married, I remember thinking, man, we have a lot of work to do because we're just so different in the ways that we communicate. And me in particular, I am, and just a little bit that I've shared in the past and some of my other episodes of just I have problems with anger. I struggle with anger. Um, and I tend to be a bit more turbulent in terms of my communication. And I've really had to work on improving that side of me, practicing better self control, and yeah, having healthier communication. So I just share all of this to say that this is really coming from a place of tips. These are tips and suggestions, not born out of necessarily success, but they came from a place of struggle and wanting to have a good and healthy marriage, wanting to fight for each other and trying different things that have helped us. So these are actual personal things that we do, that I do. And so, yeah, take what's helpful, leave what's not. And I hope can bless your marriage and other interactions or relationships you have in your own life. So first, I'm just gonna I'm just gonna jump right into the tips or suggestions and go through each one. They're not necessarily in a particular order. I didn't want to, there's not really a hierarchy. I was trying to organize them in a way that kind of made sense and flowed into one another, but I wouldn't say, yeah, there's necessarily a hierarchy. The first suggestion is and tip is to communicate expectations beforehand. This is actually pretty huge for us, for me in particular. My husband appreciates a heads up on just what is my desire from, maybe a social interaction. Maybe we're going to hang out with a friends. Maybe we're visiting my family for the weekend. Maybe we're hosting a party at our home. Anything that has to do with just a lot more kind of factors, maybe just a bit more pressure or, yeah, desires from the social thing that we're going into. or just more expectations in general, like for example, birth, like, anything that has a bit more of a weighty, the scenario is a bit more weighty, to just communicate the desires ahead of time of what you're thinking, what you're hoping. So for example, in terms of, yeah, going into a social situation or a party, we could both just very well have different expectations for what we both want out of the party. And it's good to communicate to one another, what that might be. So for me, maybe it's, I don't really care to play any of the games that are at the party or even talk to a multiplicity of people. I just really want to have one good quality conversation with this one particular individual that I haven't seen in a long time. And then maybe for my husband, it's that he wants some time to go play some sports games that are happening out on the field or on the lawn, and to give each other that opportunity to do that, to kind of seek each other out and say, "Hey, did you get that conversation? And how can I," like, facilitating that for the other person. That's one kind of example of communicating expectations beforehand. When we've had or hosted a party at our home, we've had a kind of a conversation before the party, maybe a few days before, and being like, "Okay, what do you desire, or what are your expectations from this party that you would like? So what matters most to you, or what is gonna matter most to you in terms of, what you wanna get done, um, what you wanna do at the party, and even just in general, kind of like where you're at, how are you feeling? Are you excited about this thing that we're hosting? Are you feeling stressed out about it?" And just giving the opportunity for the other person to just know where you're at, and having the self-awareness to be able to communicate and articulate to them. I think that's important. That's important to us, and that's, I think, definitely helped with mitigating, I guess, failed expectation or disappointment, where we're leaving something or something, we leave an event or maybe just even a conversation and feel like, "Oh, that wasn't really I didn't really like how that went," or, "Oh, just kind of that wasn't exactly what I wanted or desired out of it." And not to say that your spouse has to give that to you all the time, or that, you fight tooth and nail to, like, make your spouse's dreams come true all the time necessarily, but that it's good to just for the other person to be aware of that, and that if it's within their power, that they can make that happen. But then also, yeah, that there aren't as many sort of like surprises, I suppose, that come out of different scenarios, and you're not catching each other off guard with, yeah, maybe negative feelings or disappointment or fears or anxieties, so to speak, about different things. So that's number one: communicate expectations beforehand. Number two, this is for me. Before I get offended, say the phrase, "This is what I'm hearing you say." So basically, summarizing what my husband is saying before I act on feeling offended, whether that's in a accusatory manner or it's just shutting down. But if he's saying something, and if I'm starting to feel the sense of being defensive or feeling offended, before kind of f- entering into that more fully or giving into that, to clarify clearly what is it that he's actually saying, because a lot of the time things are just misinterpreted, I think. Well, especially between us, yeah, a lot of things are just misinterpreted. Maybe the delivery, the tone is just not ideal, but the thing in which they're actually saying isn't necessarily offensive, and it's important to just clarify right before, jumping to conclusions and things like that. And so that goes along with the next one, which is to don't assume or jump to conclusions. And I find this one hard also because for me, and I think a lot of people maybe feel like this, but just that I've always believed, or I do believe so often, that it's like, I've dated you since I was 19 years old. We've been married, we have 4 kids. Of course, I know what you're like. I know everything about you. I know exactly what you're thinking, and I know exactly, what your intentions are. And my husband is very good at saying, "Well, you don't actually know. You have a good assumption. You have good evidence to think the way you do, but you don't actually know what I'm thinking, or, yeah, and that you shouldn't assume. You don't know exactly what I'm thinking until you give me the chance to clarify exactly what I am thinking and what I'm saying." And I hate that because I just have yeah, I'm prideful. I just believe with all my heart that I know exactly what he's saying all the time and that I know him so well and I know him better than he knows himself. And the reality is, you might be right and I might be right that my in a sense my assumption might be true. However, even though I believe it to be true with all my heart, and even though I have a pretty good pulse on my husband and have a pretty good sense of what he's like, I have to be at peace and allow him to make the final stamp of reality. And even with my whole being, if I just like don't believe that reality, I have to trust and take him at his word and trust that he's being honest with me and with himself. And if he's not, that's something you just have to let go and be detached from because fighting tooth and nail that you know what he's saying and whatever you believe about what he's saying and what he's doing is true, fighting tooth and nail, fighting to the death for that is just not worth it. It's just objectively just at the end of the day, it's not worth it. It's a waste of time, it's a waste of peace. And it would be better for me and for one to also just drop it, be detached from it, and bring it to prayer and ask God if that, if it is something that was really offensive or you really believe like there was kind of an intention there that he wasn't maybe being completely honest about, that he can take that up with him, that he can take it up with the Lord. And I don't have to be right and prove myself right. Obviously, yeah, there's going to be things like that that maybe you feel like are more worth it or not, like that you need to get the truth out and that give a reality check to your spouse about what they're really doing, what they're really saying, because you're more aware than they are and maybe you know them better and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, like maybe there is a place for that, but oftentimes trying to expedite that process and pressuring and pushing and nagging for that to happen is just not going to work. And I hate that that's true. Like, I don't wanna believe that that's true. I would rather fight. I would rather fight and fight to be right, and that's not good. I that's a place that I need, to be humbled and to not do that, but I know at the end of the day, I know the reality, I know the truth is that just putting it aside, making peace with it, trusting my spouse and entrusting his own personal journey with our Lord is the better and right way to go. So, anyways, that's to say that this tip was to don't assume and to not jump to conclusions. So this is number 3. I'm on the third one now. The first one was communicating expectations beforehand. The second one was before I get offended to say the phrase, "This is what I'm hearing you say." The third tip would be don't assume or jump to conclusions. And now I'm on the fourth. The fourth is have a sense of humor. This is maybe an kind of uh, uncanny sort of tip, but for me, when I get annoyed with my husband or with my children for that matter, sometimes I speak in an accent, a British one, or some other accent, some sort of unknown accent. You cannot find it anywhere. They don't walk among us. I don't know. But just like to talk in a funny manner, just to kind of lighten the mood. And especially when I'm starting to get offended, I find it's helpful as a use to just to kind of like mitigate the irritation. And then my husband likes to do, like, husband likes to do this more. I'm not as good at this, nor am I inclined to do this to help ease the tension. But he definitely uses like being flirtatious as a way to kind of ease the tension, to just be yeah, like bring a lightheartedness and a jovial nature to the situation. I'm personally not very good at that. I have a hard time um yeah, kind of pulling that side out of me when I start feeling irritation. So accent is the best thing that I have in my arsenal. But I do try. I do try. And that's something that I think I am inspired by him to do more because it does definitely help. It does ease the tension. And it reminds you that you love this person. This is your spouse. This is the person you just love being around and they're your best friend. And so to not be so uptight about things, especially the little things, and to not be petty about minuscule things that you could get upset about, but to interact with each other with a flirtatiousness and a lightheartedness is always good. Something that we've been doing lately as a in terms of having a sense of humor and being more jovial is when we hear the other person say something that, like, not necessarily that you got, like, exactly offended by. You're not, like, straight up offended, but you're a little bit like, "I don't really like that you said that." We'll say to each other, "I'll give you 3 seconds. I'll give you 3 seconds to take that back." And they don't even actually have like, we'll say, obviously, we take it back, but we'll then have a conversation, be like, "Wait, were you actually offended? Like, was that something that was actually offensive?" And we do it obviously in a loving way. It's not in a sort of, like, sassy or sort of, "I'm gonna give you 3 seconds to take that back." Not like that. Just like kind of a jovial thing. And that has been a signal to us to be like, "Okay, this is something that I might be kind of offended by, but I'm not there yet. I'm still in the humor stage, so let's keep it this way, you know?" Okay, so that's number 4, which is to have a sense of humor. Number 5, give the benefit of the doubt. My husband likes to say to me when I hear something and I'm unsure or, kind of skeptical about what he's saying, he likes to say to me, "I want you to receive it in a way that serves you best." And what I know he's meaning to say is that I have the power to choose how I receive that and take that. I could see that as something offensive and be all sensitive and kind of petty about, or I can flip it and make it something that is not that, something that actually serves me best, and it serves me well, and it doesn't, yeah, just like to not have like a pessimistic or negative perception of what he's saying. Now, this is to say, though, that of course, we should both be mindful of the things that we're saying. The reality is, like, unless you wanna walk on eggshells in your marriage and in your communication, you're going to sometimes say things that are a little, like, maybe on the edge, and not that you're trying to offend the other person, but just that's just the reality of life, even with the other people, that you just say things that you don't necessarily mean to offend somebody, and if you're just hyper aware and hyper vigilant of everything that comes out of your mouth all the time and how people are gonna receive that, that's just debilitating and crippling, especially in marriage, where there should be this vulnerability, there should be this kind of there shouldn't be this wall or barrier between you and your terms of your communication. Not that you should be disrespectful, not that you should be nonchalant or dismissive of how you communicate or what you communicate. Of course, you should be extremely loving and respectful to one another, but without intending to. It's just sometimes you just say things that you didn't mean to offend or hurt somebody. So all that to say is that to give the person the benefit of the doubt, to receive it in the way that benefits you most, and then you can communicate that maybe that wasn't, like, the most ideal way that you would have liked that to be communicated or said or whatever the scenario might be, but to not just, like, on the onset, believe that this person is trying to hurt you. And I think that's actually really key, I think, in terms of giving the benefit of the doubt to your spouse, is to truly believe with all your heart that this person loves you. They're not ever trying to maliciously hurt you. If anything, they're just, like, not being mindful maybe, or being kind of oblivious to how they're speaking to you, and that's something in and of itself that they should work on. But at the end of the day, this person loves you, they will your good, that they're not trying to hurt you, they're not trying to sabotage you. That's what the devil wants, right? It's for us to turn each other, to create division, to sow doubt, in our relationship and in our marriage. And we can so easily cultivate that sense of doubt and um, irritation and a malicious skepticism towards the other person when we don't truly believe that this person wills our good and that they really love us. So that would go along with number 5, give the benefit of the doubt. On to the next. Number 6, plan important conversations ahead of time. So my husband and I do marriage meetings relatively often where we plan ahead of time to talk about just logistical stuff. So whether that means things with the kids, things within our marriage, maybe just ways in which we're kind of dropping the ball for our own personal lives. So like in prayer or habits that we ought to be doing. And we plan that ahead of time and kind of create a sense a neutral time to talk about this rather than in the moment or being yeah, kind of rash with these kind of conversations because sometimes maybe it's just like a one-time dealio that like something happened and it's not a persisting thing, and you can kind of just yeah, you can kind of move on and let it go, or it is something that's persistent and you need to have an actual conversation about it. It's good to just have neutral conversation, a neutral time to plan to have those kinds of conversations, and it gives you an opportunity to bring it up without being very emotionally fueled or sensitive about it. I have an on my phone, I have an ongoing note if I know when I know this meeting is going to happen, I'll start just, yeah, creating, like, putting jotting down stuff in my notes of things that I wanna talk about or things that I wanna address, and my husband does the same, and we bring that together. Yeah, and we discuss them and go through them one by one, and that's just been very good because also it leaves the you know that you're gonna talk about it, so one, it makes you not so antsy, I suppose, to, like, deal with it right away. And then once you have those practical meetings and you know you have them, the times that you are just with each other and you're just hanging out and you're going on a date or you're just having fun with one another, that it's just fun, that there's not other stuff kind of looming in the background that needs to be dealt with, that you can just purely enjoy each other and be in each other's presence. So that's number 6, plan important conversations ahead of time. Number 7, write a letter. This is something that my husband has asked me to do and something that I have done, especially when it comes to something that is just more weighty. Maybe it's something that has come up a lot and I don't feel like we're quite on the same page yet still. I feel like there's parts missing or that my husband's not getting the full picture still as to what, I'm feeling about this thing. And so writing a letter it gives clarity to me to really be able to articulate what it is that I'm feeling about this thing. And it's up to you, but sometimes I just so if it's something that's kind of, I just feel like you need to hear my point of view and that's kind of it. And we don't need to like hash it out. Sometimes I'll just give my husband the letter and he likes that too because then he can have that letter and he can refer back to it and he can think about it. It's not something that we have a conversation about and then life happens and it's not his fault, but he just can't remember all the things that I said and all the details that were a part of, the things that I were trying to communicate. But if it's written down, then he can refer back to it. He can take it to prayer. He can actually think about those things and kind of sit with it and simmer with it. So sometimes I give him the letter and then sometimes I read it out loud in front of him and then give it to him. But just that it's a kind of a script for me to not just be all over the place when I'm communicating something that's maybe really meaningful and a vulnerable place for me to share, but that it's, something that I've put a lot of reflective thought into and I'm sort of presenting my heart to him, putting myself in a place of vulnerability and saying, this is my thoughts, this is my heart, this is how I'm feeling, and I'm asking you to just kind of receive that. We found writing a letter sometimes to be really helpful, especially when it's something that's persistent and it just seems like not clicking, or it's something that just needs more time to mull over and reflect. That writing a letter can be a really good form of uh, communication in that way. Number 8 is my husband gave this one. He said to be tactful. So he said to know your spouse, know how your spouse communicates, know your spouse's temperament and personality and tendencies. Not to say that you have to walk on eggshells or you can't be 100% authentic or genuine with your spouse or with the person with you or that you're talking to about what you're feeling, what you're saying, but like to be aware of your audience is, I think it is true. It's important to know how this person communicates. So for example, my husband is definitely more of a logical communicator, and I think it would be just unfortunate and a loss on my end if I'm trying to communicate something that I could say in a more kind of systematical manner if I just took some thought to it versus giving him a whole plate of emotional spaghetti that he has to kind of sift through what the heck I'm saying, um, versus just being aware of what my husband is like and realizing that my goal here is to be heard and to be seen. And therefore, I should be okay and should be willing to adjust in whatever manner I need to in order to achieve that end, which is to communicate clearly what it is that I'm feeling or what it is I want him to know. If I can say it in 5 words, it's better to say it in 5 words than to say it in 50 words, so to speak, you know? So um, that's kind of the communication style, but then also just knowing what your spouse is like, knowing how they receive things well. That you talk about the people talk about the compliment sandwich or whatever. And some people I think do really well with that, like sort of like an affirmation and a criticism and then an affirmation. Some people want just a straight here, this is what it is, this is how I'm feeling, and this is what I feel like we need to change. Sometimes in terms of being tactful, realizing that sometimes you kind of have to do more of the heavy lifting in terms of giving the person bringing to the person what it is that is an issue, what it is that's a problem, but then also being the one to bring forth solutions or bring forth suggestions rather than it being a um as something that you say all your stuff and then you're like, okay, respond to me, come up, like, I want you to come up with a solution, I want you to tell me how you're going to change this. And not to say that they shouldn't put in the effort and not to say that they yeah, don't need to, but that sometimes you have to be willing to put in that extra work. That's part of being in a relationship. And yeah, it's kind of sucky sometimes, so to speak, because you would maybe you would feel more loved if they just were able to receive everything you say and then in that instant tell you how they're going to change, how they're going to improve the situation or help solve the problem. But sometimes they don't have those answers. And sometimes you actually do. You already have thought about this. You have already thought about what is the best way that you want to be loved or how the situation should go about next time or something like that. You should say that. You should present that and not just hope or expect them to come up with those thoughts right there on the spot when you've had the time to think about those things ahead of time, but also that you already have personal preferences as to how you'd want something to be carried out. And so, just to kind of give a little in that sense too. The next point kind of relates to this in terms of being tactful. So this is number 9, but to be concise, especially because as women communicating to our husbands, men in general, and mostly in general, like things to be clear and concise. They don't want a long, drawn out story and a million different things, that that you want them to think about, and you're just going on and on and on. Definitely fall into this skull even for myself, but I realize that the best way I think I can get my husband to hear what I have to say, for him to, be able to actually process our conversation after, is to communicate with in a more concise manner, less is more. Because it is a lot. It is information overload. I mean, even when I hear myself sometimes talk, I go, "That's a lot. If I were him listening to me, yeah, I think I would feel tired too by the end of the conversation." So, I think that it's important to be concise and to, yeah, like, not just let things kinda get long and drawn out, because the reality is, I think, especially for our spouses, they do a lot better with smaller doses of information rather than just so much, especially on the emotional level. Um, and I think that's important to work on being able to articulate that. To communicate and to articulate our feelings clearly is something that no matter your personality, no matter your temperament, no matter your feelings, it is objectively, I think, a good thing to learn to be more concise, clear, about what it is that you want to communicate. And so that moves on to the next, which is the feelings conversation versus the what happened conversation. So this is number 10. In the book Difficult Conversations, basically just to sum up the book, or like at least a big main point of the book, is that very often the conflict comes from the individuals having a different kind of conversation. One person is trying to have the feelings conversation, which is saying, "This is how you made me feel." And the other person is trying to have the what happened conversation, the facts, the scenario. And I'm sure we can all guess that usually it's the chick who's trying to have the feelings conversation and the dude who's trying to have the what happened conversation. And so, because that's unclear and because they're kind of working on different tracks, they come head to head very often in their conversation and don't get anywhere. I definitely still fall into this even today. So now, when we talk, sometimes it's really helpful before we go in. We'll both say to each other, actually, my husband's very good at remembering this more than I am. I just go right into it. And he says, okay, wait, is this a feelings conversation or is this a what happened conversation? Because depending on what conversation you want to have, a different hat is kind of getting put on. And that's great. I think that's a really good thing. That's a good thing to be aware of, right? When you're communicating to your spouse something, to be aware of, are you communicating what you're feeling and so you therefore just want to be heard and seen, or you want to go through the conversation in a what happened sort of manner where you're talking more about the details, the scenario thing. And obviously there's a little like there's going to be interplay, like there's going to be a overlapping, so to speak, of both. But just to kind of be aware, to give the person a heads up about kind of like at least at the on the initial where it is you're trying to what you're where you're entering in terms of the conversation to begin with. So, anyways, those are I think that distinction has been really helpful for us. It's helped to kind of bring a lot more clarity as to what it is the the thing, the actual thing that we're trying to get to into the conversation instead of kind of going around in circles. That has really helped. Okay, the final thing is this is tip number 11, which is to let it go. By that, I mean, the reality is when we marry, when I married my husband and when people marry, their spouses, you married them with a kind of not a completely permanent, but like you got the sense of what they're like. They have been what they're like and they've maybe changed a bit. They've adjusted over time and they obviously can still adjust, but a lot of the things that you married your spouse with, they will still continue to have in its own form in different forms for in a sense the rest of your marriage. I think it's important sometimes. It's not, and I'm not saying to be kind of stagnant or mediocre or just kind of be like, throw your hands up and be like, well, it is what it is. And, whatever, nothing can be done about our interactions or his stubbornness or my, um, I don't know, my way of going around about or whatever. But realizing that when you said I do to this person, you said that you were going to love them who they are in that moment. And that's not going to change. And that shouldn't change. And so I think I find this with older couples actually. It seems like, a lot of the reason why they don't seem to fight as much anymore or there's not as much conflict is not because they've grown mediocre or dismissive or just neglectful of the other person, but they've just kind of accepted who the other person is and any of the sort of frustrations or weaknesses they find in the other person, they just choose to look beyond them and see the person that they said I do to all these years ago and choose to love them anyway, because that's what you're called to. And it kind of doesn't really matter if they're a great communicator or not, or if this trait of them has frustrated you forever. I mean, till death do us part. So, that's something that you just, in some ways, you have to live with in not in a despairing sort of manner, but in a sort of in a detached manner where you say, maybe it is something that you really think is an issue. I'm not saying there aren't some pretty glaring issues in terms of some people's way of communicating and personalities and, things like that. But realizing that if that is something that is persistent in this individual, so when you married them or or it's come up in marriage and it's a persistent thing, is that that's something that you just kind of have to surrender sometimes. You bring it to the Lord, and I think you should bring it to the Lord. Ask the Lord to come to that place in your marriage and trust that He's going to in His own way. And to be able to just let it go and be detached from that, and then do your part in being able to mitigate or help, the maybe the glaring defect in communication that seems to arise. But just to move on though, and to not just dwell or despair so much and how you wish or lament maybe your spouse is this or that way or more like this or that person, but accept them for who they are, rejoice in who they are, accept the beauties of them, the flaws in them, and anything that is really necessary and needed to be dealt with, that, yeah, to be, yeah, brought to a priest, to be brought maybe to a close friend, brought into prayer, but ultimately to be willing to let it go and be detached from it and allow God's timing to work whenever he chooses to work in your spouse's life. There is also the realization and the goodness, I think, of just being detached and accepting who your spouse is, what they're like, and allowing growth to come in its time and, yeah, and to be patient with that. A quote I like from Searching for and Maintaining Peace by Father Jacques Philippe is that sometimes we're harder on people than God even is. And then also that we're along that same line of thinking is just that we're more impatient than God even is. We're harder on other people. We're more impatient with people than God is. God is so infinitely merciful, and we have such a short bandwidth when it comes to the flaws of other people, especially when they inconvenience us or hurt us personally. To surrender that and to, yeah, give it to God. I mean, that really is like the best thing that you can do. Lamenting about it, fighting for it in this, like, in this restless manner, getting angry, yelling, all of that stuff. At the end of the day, it's not worth it. And I have to tell myself so often because in my mind, in my frailty in those moments, I think it's so worth it to just expend all this energy. But it's really not. It's really not. And it's not going to make me a saint. And I really need to be more convicted about that. Anyways, that's the last tip, is just to let it go, to be detached and to surrender all things to our Lord. Anyways, I'm going to wrap up here. I hope these little tips and suggestions were helpful. These are things that we do in our marriage and things that I will continue to do and need to do for sure in our marriage. And hopefully it blesses you and you can find something helpful for that. Thanks so much for joining me this week. Till next time, God bless.